Okay, so as you guys know, Kamala Harris is currently surging in the polls. She has gone massively. So we can see here, if you look at Biden, he was actually leading right before the debate by a little bit, by like zero point 0.5, zero point 0.2, zero point 0.3. And after the debate, he absolutely craters. And by the time he actually drops out after his like attempted media tour, he's down 3 points nationally in the election. And what we can see is if we switch this over to Kamala Harris's numbers, she had started out basically back here July 24th, slightly ahead. And then now has raised her lead all the way to the point of 2.6 points. So from the debate, that's about a 5 point shift. From prior to debate, it's about like 2.3 point shift. So she is surging in the polls right now. The election has completely flipped. And there's actually something really interesting going on because it means there's some group specifically that is actually surging for Kamala Harris. A lot of this surge is almost entirely being driven by this one singular group. We also know that double haters are playing a big role. So the people who were double haters of both Trump and Biden are actually leaning towards Harris now because it's just somebody else. The vibes are just different. They've decided to flip to Kamala Harris, and so she's able to do well with those double haters who have now flipped. Now, what we're going to see here is a little bit of a breakdown of some numbers here that actually explains that there's this really, really big group of voters, that being women voters, who are absolutely surging for Kamala Harris, and the male vote is actually switching kind of very little, very scant, but there's an absolutely massive surge amongst women voters for Kamala Harris. So go ahead and check this out.
The national polls first. This is Democrat versus Trump margin, and I want to point out this is average across the same pollsters. Look at Biden versus Trump, women and men. What we see here is the gender gap is working in Donald Trump's advantage. He holds a 9-point advantage among men against Joe Biden, and Joe Biden only held a full 4-point advantage among women. But take a look now. Look at how the race has changed. Instead of having a 4-point advantage among women as Biden did, look at Harris's advantage. It leaps up to 11 points. In fact, men haven't changed their voting patterns at all, at least in the national polls. A 9-point advantage for Donald Trump versus Joe Biden, a 9-point advantage against Kamala Harris. What has occurred is women voters are flocking to the Democratic ticket. Look at that. Look at that. 4 points versus 11 points. That is the reason that Kamala Harris has turned this race around.
You said this is nationally, right?
This is national.
So what about in swing states?
What's going on in the swing states? So let's take a look at those Great Lake battleground states, Pennsylvania, Michigan, and Wisconsin. This is among registered voters. What do we see here? It's a very similar picture. Biden versus Trump women. Biden has a larger advantage in those Great Lake battleground states, according to those New York Times Siena College polls, at 10 points. But again, that surge among women, we're seeing the same thing in those battleground states as we saw nationally. Kamala Harris up 17 points among women. Men, very little change. Donald Trump doing a little bit worse, but still a very clear advantage. But the same story in the swing states as we see nationally. The gender gap was working for Donald Trump against Joe Biden, and now it's working against him against Kamala Harris.
Is this the same, smaller, or bigger than? Can you put it in context? I mean, is it the same that we normally see?
Yeah. All right. So let's take a look. Let's go through time, particularly here. All right. This is the Democrat versus the Republican for president. Again, these are key Great Lake battleground states: Michigan, Pennsylvania, and Wisconsin. 2020 and 2016 are final. These are the exit polls. Yeah. 2024 is now. Look at the women margin. Look at what's going on here. Look how much better Kamala Harris is doing among women voters. It was 11 points Hillary Clinton back in 2016, 13 points in 2020. Look at this margin now, 17 points. Interestingly, the gender gap becoming wider over time. It's much wider this year than what we're normally expecting, because in fact, Donald Trump is winning men voters by 15 points. That's better than he did in 2020 in these same states, and it's even better than he did in 2016, although just slightly better. But the bottom line here is Kamala Harris is winning this race right now, at least in these key battleground states, because of what she's doing with women voters. Women voters are energized, and it is the reason that Kamala Harris turned a deficit that Joe Biden had into a lead.
And also, just really quick, when we talk about we do not know, because there's a lot that goes into it, that this is because she's a woman. It's just their support for her.
Correct. Yeah. We don't know. We don't necessarily know the reason. We just know she's doing better with women voters, significantly better than Joe Biden was, and better than either Joe Biden or Hillary Clinton did back in 2016.
Fascinating. Great stuff, Harry. Thank you so much.
Okay, so as you guys can see here, there appears to be this massive gender gap that is occurring. And so it looks like Biden's margin with women was actually really, really weak, as you can see. And so there's a difference of +4 versus +11. And so now Kamala Harris has a +11 with women voters, whereas Trump only has a +9 with men. And also an interesting question is, okay, well, who actually votes more? Is there sort of a better advantage by having one group over the other? And it looks like slightly women actually vote slightly more than men. So this is one report. It says proportion of eligible adult population who reported voting. And so women were 68.4% in 2020 versus 65 for men. And it seems pretty consistent that women slightly vote more, but even a couple percentage points in some of these elections, it looks like 4 or 5%. Also, the voter registration is also higher, is reported, so 3%, going higher. So women actually would be a better group to have an advantage over. So it's pretty interesting also because, we have a lot of abortion ballots all throughout. And then obviously, Roe versus Wade being overturned in 2022 is a hugely impactful thing. And so this might give Kamala Harris a real huge opportunity to surge. Also, keep in mind, JD Vance is on the ticket, and he can't stop having quotes about him that are really bad towards women coming out. I don't know if you guys saw it, but he basically said that postmenopausal women's only role in life is basically just to raise children. So once again, denigrating women to just being child carers, I guess, and that's literally it. And they were child carers before, but now they're too old to do that, so now they're just child carers. So I think that will allow for sort of like a Super Saiyan effect where already abortion is just such a massively salient issue. To the point where in Florida, basically codifying Roe versus Wade pretty much, Amendment 4 in Florida, you saw a poll had 58%. Now, you need 60% for the amendment to pass in Florida, but that's a massive amount of support, and even the opposition is muted because it wasn't the full-fledged, 42%, it was 38 or so, 36 or something like that. So this is going to allow her really to capitalize in this election to be able to seize those women voters, and women actually vote more than men do, so it's going to be interesting to see how that kind of divide works. The interesting question is why Biden was doing so poorly with women. I'm actually not personally sure. I mean, I know he's an old white man, but I feel like if you're voting for someone, it should be about policy positions. I'm not exactly sure what Kamala Harris is going to do differently than Joe Biden on abortion or anything of that nature. I know that she's a woman, but that doesn't really mean anything with policy. What are your policy positions? Not what your gender is, of course. And abortion actually isn't really much of a gender issue. I think it's something like 40-something to 50-something when you compare versus men versus women in terms of support. So it's not really a gender issue in that way. It's a gender issue in that obviously it impacts women far more, obviously, right? Because they're the ones that carry babies. But it's not in the way it's like, oh, well, men don't support abortion and women do. That's not how it works. Close to 40% or something or more of women actually don't support reproductive rights. So pretty interesting. Again, this election I think kind of comes down to vibes. I think I've submitted to the vibes sort of being the daddy, and you just kind of have to say yes, daddy, to the vibes, and I think it just comes down to the vibes. It's really interesting, too, in terms of political strategy here because Donald Trump has a really massive margin amongst men, but it looks like the margin amongst men has even gone down. So she made a little bit of ground covered in the newly Penn states here, the Rust Belt states. But it's an interesting strategy question as to, okay, well, what do you do now? Because obviously you can't win over the old white male vote, which it seems like she's struggling with. But all you need to be able to do is if you can pierce in a couple points, 2-3 points maybe, all you need, if you can get the margin down from +15 for men for him down to maybe +13 or +12, that should be enough to win you the election. So the question strategy-wise, I'll even pose this to you, do you focus on turning women out or getting more women support or turning them out to come out to vote? Or do you instead try to figure out how to convince these old white male voters to come out and vote for you? Because that does seem to be the kind of category that Kamala's lacking in. There's an interesting question of, okay, well, what is the strategy here? You definitely have to really focus on getting women voters out because it's such a salient situation. And you can see that with the sort of gender gap here that's absolutely massive in favor of Kamala Harris with women. But obviously with abortion, Roe versus Wade, and then JD Vance is obviously just so weirdly sort of denigrating women all the time. So that's another situation that really poses beneficial for her. But I think that there hopefully can be some things that we can do to kind of etch into that white male vote, because I think that that's really the stingy part. And if you can even just kind of bring that down a couple of points, I'm not saying get a majority or anything like that, but if you can even just get a little bit, it would be super, super impactful, especially because it would kind of be a swing in your direction. So it's kind of like double the value, right? It's interesting too because the women margin is going up, so I'm not sure what's going on. If this is reflective of a sort of post Roe America, a post Roe reversal, I would say a post Dobbs America. I don't know. That's the only thing I could think of here because Hillary Clinton was a woman and the margin is only 0.6. Now we're comparing polls to final data, so it's a little bit different, but I am really interested to see what the reason is. It may not necessarily be because that she's actually a woman, it may be due to something else. But Biden, I know, had a bad record previously on abortion. He was always a blue dog Democrat, and abortion was actually a big weakness for him. Also, I think another thing is, he was president of the United States, and so I would see a lot of times people would be like, oh, he would say on Twitter, like, oh, we need to codify Roe versus Wade, and people would be like, hey, you're the president now. So I think Kamala, I guess, having a fresh start, she's kind of gotten away from having any of that sort of association or that kind of responsibility, etc. So it's pretty interesting to see how that kind of thing is turning out. And so this is going to be a huge, huge group for Kamala Harris that she is absolutely surging with. And I think it's only going to get stronger and stronger as time goes on, because I think as we kind of get past the convention and we start getting closer, because we're still far out, she'll be able to hone in, really focus on abortion, and really make that one of the main issues. And so maybe you can even advance this margin even higher. But this group is absolutely surging for Kamala. And again, you want to focus on turning them out. But also, is there something you can do to bring that margin down from plus 15 down to plus 13 for men? Because even just a 1 or 2 point margin is going to be huge, absolutely massive. So pretty interesting stuff, going deep in on what's going on in terms of why the numbers are shifting. It appears that women voters are massively surging for Kamala Harris.